Welcome back to Last Minute Movies, and today we're going to be talking about giant robots taking over the Earth.
Activate Skynet.
Activate or Skynet 66.
Oh fuck. You confusing movies.
Oh shoot, we're not talking about Star Wars?
No,
My bad.
not this time.
Today we're talking about Terminator.
The
original
OG Terminator, the 1984. And
Yes.
that's also another movie.
Yes. So, I guess we could just talk about, just sort of our thoughts of the movies, of the movie in the beginning. So, Terminator for me always will forever hold a special place in my heart. One, because I chose the movie. But, this is one of the first R-rated movies I've ever watched in my life. And I watched it, pretty young as well. I watched a lot of R-rated movies when I was a kid, but it was awesome. So, it was really cool, because, I've seen action movies up to that point, right? But I never seen, some dude, ripping out someone's guts or people exploding each other. And I was just like, oh, wow, this is really awesome. And, obviously, since then, I've watched T2 and all the other terrible Terminator films and all of that. But as far as action goes, there's just nothing like an 80s action flick, especially by James Cameron. Because, the significance of this film is, we have a lot of action films that come out these days. All the Marvel movies and, Mission Impossible and, John Wick, which John Wick is actually really good, so I can't, shit on it or anything like that. But, a lot of the other action movies are really kind of desensitizing, Transformers, because it's just explosions for the sake of explosions, and it's just a lot of dumb shit. Just no plot. You know me, I'm a huge fan of things blowing up. I mean, I like Godzilla, right? So he's the king of exploding shit and all of that. But the subtle nuance of Terminator, nobody really kind of picks up. And the pace of it as well. And that's something that's very important in any kind of filmmaking, is the pace and the story. Whether you're doing an action film, whether you're doing horror, drama, whatever it is, those are some of the most important things that you can do. So we're going to be talking about this. Are there any thoughts that you have about the film, Igor? I guess just surface level.
So I gotta have to admit that the last time before last night I saw Terminator was my early childhood. I was 7 or 8, and I watched it with my grandpa, and it was a beautiful time, but I didn't remember jack shit. So watching it last night was like watching it for the first time, and I gotta say, there are so many elements in that film that I missed, and it was really interesting to just kind of see, because I was stepping into it hoping to see kind of a complete lack of plot, like an 80s movie, but it was surprising. And although there are some elements to it that I was not necessarily pleased with, the relationship, the whole thing, which we'll get into later. But what I did enjoy was kind of the thrill of the plot with all the violence and the shootouts, and the fact that they managed to squeeze so much concept art into it, and so much exposition, and so many characters, and it works all together.
Yeah, for such a large plot, it really felt self-contained, because when you get the idea of time traveling robots that are trying to go back in time to destroy people who are going to save humanity, Messiah sort of thing, a lot of kind of religious stuff going on in there as well. In Terminator and all that, you'd think oh my gosh, this is such a big thing, but it's surprisingly a very self-contained sort of film. But before we talk about it, let's talk about where the idea came from. So basically what it came from, obviously from James Cameron, but what a lot of people don't know is that he was in the middle of filming his first film. I think it was one of his first films. He didn't.
It was one of his opening ones.
Yeah. But it was Piranha 2 or something like that, and he really hated it, and he was so obviously being a filmmaker, if you're filming something that you hate, it's just absolute depression.
From experience, from knowing successful film directors and whatnot, people who make features that they themselves hate but everybody else love, it is depressing, but only to an extent, because you like to eat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of like, yeah, it's kind of a set thing, but they're just kind of waiting for the next shot to do something they actually enjoy. I don't think
That is
people
true,
actually
but
get like depressed because of that.
well, he definitely did, and especially if yeah, I mean, you know how the Piranha movies are.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, it's depression within itself.
Dude, I actually seen a couple of them in my like conscious years, and honestly, it's a whole
Yeah.
different dialogue we gotta
Yeah,
have.
you know what I'm talking about. But anyways, so he was having like, after editing, and you know how I mean, editing stuff you like is a mental challenge within itself, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just long as shit. But editing something that you hate is probably even worse. So then, he goes to sleep, and then all of a sudden he has this dream of like this solid chrome, like this torso, like that's like crawling out of this explosion, and it starts like dragging itself, and all of that. And then he like woke up, and then he ended up like writing a script about it, and then he like sent it in and like pitched it, and then it became like this, like Terminator, like one of the most successful franchises of all time, from a dream. And it just goes to show like dreams are not overrated, you know? Like
Art
if you
is
have
not
an idea for
overrated.
something, art is not overrated. Anything that you dream up, even if it's like daydreaming or whatever, anything like that, put that idea in there because it could become amazing, you know? And I mean, this movie had a lot of things going against it, right? I mean, obviously James Cameron was doing a film that he hated, right? And then you get the idea of something from a dream. It's like, while it's awesome, it's also like, okay, well, how am I gonna pitch this to people? And then, for a lot of people, it's like, oh, well, this just sounds like a B movie, right? It sounds like a total B movie. And then on top of it, you have like O.J. Simpson who wants to play the Terminator. like,
Yeah.
like originally what they were gonna do is that they were gonna have Schwarzenegger play the character of Kyle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they were gonna have O.J. Simpson play the Terminator.
You know,
Which I'm so glad that didn't happen.
that is very true. And I bet the whole like Schwarzenegger wanting to be the good guy, that kind of fed into the second movie later when he actually plays the good guy.
Yeah, but also like I think before he did Terminator, he did Conan, and obviously like Conan was a good guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of almost simultaneous, but I might be wrong.
It was really close because
Yeah.
Conan came out in like 82.
Yeah.
And this came out, I want to say 84, 85.
84.
Yeah, 84.
What I do know is that part of the reason why he has so little lines is because he did not speak English so well back then.
Yeah.
So yeah, he only had so many lines, and that accent, I think, kind of commemorated his character even more.
But it works because he's a robot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Like, well, as Cyborg. But, people could be like, he's not a robot, he's a cyborg. But yeah.
But if I wanted to be like super nitpicky about this, because I can, I would say that
Yeah.
the film starts with, it doesn't start with that statement, but like Kyle Reese does say that like they smell sweat and everything, even bad breath. They act like humans and do things like humans, and while yes, he does look like a human, but he still speaks like a robot and sometimes moves like a robot, which is like a little off. But I do think it feeds into the character and a threatening aspect of it. So it's a balance.
I do have some stuff to say. We'll get into that a little bit later. But let's give like a surface level of like the plot and what's going on. So Igor, I'll let you take over for that. So what's going on in this time traveling?
Okay.
Adventure.
Yeah. So let me just. I mean, for those of you who have not seen Terminator, for like two of you who have not seen.
Yeah,
Terminator.
like if you we don't even need to do this. I mean, we will, but if you haven't seen Terminator, like, what are you doing, bro?
Yeah.
Go stop this video and watch it, and then come back, like and subscribe our video, because that's what you deserve.
So the plot, there is in the future a system that is basically artificial intelligence that is like a network between all automated things on Earth that is like super advanced, decides that humans need to be exterminated because reasons. And it instantaneously launches a nuclear attack across the planet, and everybody is obliterated, and those that survive, the surviving humans, live underground, and are basically fighting armies of machines and robots and cyborgs that are trying to kill them. Uh, the Skynet meanwhile develops the Terminators, which are robots that look like humans, the cyborgs that at first had rubber skin, but then they grew human tissue on top of them so they could smell and kind of blend in with the humans, and then they would sneak their way into where the humans live and start to exterminate them. Hence,
fuck shit up. Yeah.
Terminators.
Terminate them. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so as far as the story goes, the story takes place in the present, but also in the past. So basically, Back to the Future, 1984.
But no skateboards and a lot of blood and a lot of gore.
Yes. As the story in the future in the war progresses, there is this person named John Connor who leads the war against the machines, and they manage to win with leadership strategy and a whole bunch of other interesting things that we're told about, but we don't get to see until way later down the line. But so as the war progresses, they discovered that Skynet has a time machine, and they had a special operation to send one of the Terminators back into the past. Well, I guess not back into the past, just into the past. Fair. Into 1984, find John Connor's mother and kill her before she gives birth to him, so that he basically gets erased from the space-time continuum and does not get to lead the uprising against the machines and eventually winning the war. So the whole movie basically takes place in 1984, which at that time was the present, and we get to watch this girl Sarah Connor trying to survive while Schwarzenegger, who's the bad Terminator, tries to kill her. And chases her around the city in various different creative ways, while the guy named Kyle Reese, who was sent into the past by John Connor via the time machine that the Skynet has built, he gets sent into the past into 1984 to protect her from the Terminator. What happens?
Yeah, so Kyle was sorry to interrupt, but Kyle's he's one of John Connor's soldiers in the Resistance and all of that, and he gets sent. He gets sent to the past as well to protect Sarah. So yeah,
which is wild. And while John Connor is there, he protects Sarah Connor, who basically gets pulled out of her day-to-day life as a waitress, and then just kind of forced to be in constant hiding with Kyle Reese. And over the course of I think it was a day, less than 2 days they've been together, they managed to fall in love. Smash, and he gets her pregnant, and she is pregnant with John Connor, who will
they do
be
the good old sex, and
I did watch the newer Terminators, I think the one that came out in 2014 or 2012 or something, the one of the later ones.
Oh god, those two, Terminator Salvation.
The Salvation, there you go. I actually kind of enjoyed it. It has its own, it had its problems, but I kind of enjoyed it. But the thing is,
you're the first one I've ever heard say that.
I mean, I did not speak English at all, so I watched it in Russian.
Oh, so it was in Russian?
Yeah.
Oh, that's probably pretty hardcore.
I mean, I guess I enjoyed the grittiness of the world because they actually kind of had the budget to build it. But that's besides the point. So the whole time I was just kind of thinking, shit, we learned so much about the John Connor person, but all they do is fight to, enable his existence in the first place, so we don't get to see him. And it's very interesting. But so in the end, they fight, and there's all kinds of very their lives are hanging by a thread, and while the Terminator is really hard to kill, he gets shot at with a shotgun so many times, he gets blown up, he gets burned, and he just doesn't die. And Kyle Reese,
get his fucking arm and leg hacked off and exploded, and he's still going after them.
In other words, the typical 80s Tuesday. Kyle Reese ends up sacrificing himself to, pretty much kill him, while Sarah Connor is kind of manages to stay alive. And
which doesn't work, because the Terminator's still alive.
Well, it kind of works, he kind of split that thing on half, and that's when the dream of James Cameron comes in, when that thing starts to pull itself by its arms, trying to get to her.
But then she got caught in the explosion as well.
Well, but
Yeah.
she
So
crushed
then
him with a press in the end.
she did. Yeah,
You
she
know,
said, "You're terminated, fucker."
I'm
Good
just
old '80s catchphrases.
I just realized like how convenient it is that of all the places they ended up exploding that
They
truck
end up
by.
going to a factory. Yeah.
Exactly, with
Yeah.
this hydraulic press. But I don't, it
It's
was
like,
cool.
wow, what a coincidence.
Yeah, but
it's exactly what we needed.
you know, that's a thing. Like, I think movies like Terminator, back then, like, that probably wasn't the case, but in 2020, it, like, requires a little bit of suspension of disbelief, because so many
Yeah.
films stemmed out of it. We find all of it, like, in the modern day, we find all of it to be very kind of generic. But, you know, if you suspend the disbelief just enough, you will be in it, and it'll pull you in because it works. Yeah. And, you know, this is something that I'm really happy, actually, that I watched this film after going to film school, because I'm starting to, like, realize exactly how effective this absolute bare bone traditional storytelling can be from watching this movie. And I honestly feel like this is a perfect example of that, because, like, you have your regular, you know, like, you have a good guy and a bad guy. Even, like, from the introduction scenes, you can tell so much. You know, Schwarzenegger comes in, like the Terminator, the bad guy. You don't even know what's happening. Why the fuck are there lightning strikes next to a dumpster? You know, like, he appears.
Yeah.
First thing he does, he's butt naked. This is Arnie we're talking about. Amazing.
He's back in the day and we're probably going crazy. And some of the men, too.
Oh, I mean,
But,
I would.
but-
I'm all in that. Anyways, so the first thing that the first thing that Arnie does, you know, he finds a bunch of, you know, he finds these three dudes and murders them and rips their guts out with his fist, like, and then gets their clothes. I need your clothes situation, right? And then when Kyle Reese first shows up, he's like clearly in a lot more pain from this transition. We don't even know what it is yet.
Yes,
The lightning situation,
exactly.
you know. Then
Yeah,
he is
yeah,
forced to
yeah.
flee the cops, and then, you know, that another kind of iconic scene where he, like, points the gun at the cop and goes, "What year is this? Like, what time is this?" Or forgot what exactly he said.
So it's interesting, actually, because, and I think this is something that this film does really, really well, is, well, obviously it's about man versus, like, technology, but I think there's also a man versus himself sort of thing going on in this movie, and it really blurs the lines between what's human and what is robot. Like, it does a good job of saying, like, well, in a lot of the ways it can be the same, and then there's differences as well. So in the beginning of the film, we see Arnold, you know, he's time traveled and he goes in, right? And he's perfectly fine. There's nothing about him that looks injured or anything like that. And he just walks, you know, soaks in the LA skyline completely nude and all that, because, you know, that's what Terminators do. And then, you know, he goes, attacks those guys, and one of the dudes tries to stab him with a knife, and it just completely kind of bounces off of him, and then he's, like, lifting people up. So we get our first sort of subtle kind of look, like, okay, there's something off about this guy, right? There's something different. But then we look at Kyle Reese, and we see him, like, he falls down, he's stumbling, and then he's, like, in a lot of pain. We see scars on him, and then we see him, he's looking kind of cold. And then, you know, he takes the homeless dude's pants and all that kind of stuff. But the important thing is that he never kills anyone. And that's the difference there. It's like, okay, so we know that the difference between, in this specific film, the difference between man versus machine is that the man is not going to kill anyone while the machine is going to kill somebody.
One other thing about, like, the human is that I think what kind of made me feel for Kyle Reese so much is that we see his trauma throughout the movie. Like, we're given so little time with, like, his dialogues and monologues and the storytelling, because half of the more than half of the things he says are exposition. And just, like, you know, we need to understand, like, you know, and there's obviously all these dumb sci-fi questions, like when he talks to the therapist person, you know, he's like, why didn't he get guns with him? Why didn't he, you know, all this shit, right? But with the little screen time we had, he had trauma from, you know, surviving the war with the machines and growing up in that environment.
And I think that's what made his exposition part so digestible, because a lot of exposition is just boring as shit. It's like, you know, it's like one of those unwritten rules. I mean, it's actually a written rule too, but it's like, you know, in filmmaking, show, don't tell, right?
Yes.
Like, if you can show what happened, do not talk about what happened, just show it. But the thing is, in this movie, is that I feel like his exposition is both is a showing in a way, because as he's talking about the machines you know, the Terminators and all of that sort of, or Cyborg, sorry, but as he's talking about the Terminators and Skynet and all of that sort of stuff, we can almost see like this what's going on in his eyes, right? We can see and we can feel and visualize what he went through, what kind of, you know, threat they're dealing with, you know, the almost supernatural kind of force that the Terminator is.
Mm-hmm.
And how this Terminator just won't stop. It won't be bargained with. There's nothing you can do to stop it from killing you unless you destroy it itself. And then take that on top of the fact that Kyle easily probably could end up killing that Terminator, but he doesn't have the weapons like he had in the future.
Exactly.
The weapons of the past are not going to be able to do the amount of damage that it takes in order to deal with the Terminator. So all the chips are stacked against you, and the tension is insane with this shit. It's crazy. It's such a tense-filled movie.
And speaking of tension, the ways they're building it are also super just playbook, like literally bare bones storytelling. Like, you know, because as we go on, right, we need to show that the villain is powerful and the protagonist is powerless. In our case, the protagonist is actually Sarah Connor, so she's like completely powerless. But even the person who's defending her, Kyle Reese, is also just a human. And, you know, it shows in every aspect of it. Like, Arnie is working alone, while Kyle Reese technically kind of sort of has police on his side. Not exactly. You know, at least they're not trying to kill him. But, you know, Arnie has all of these guns and, like, asking for a plasma cannon, while, you know, Kyle Reese is bound with just, like, one shotgun that can kind of throw.
He's getting a shotgun, and he, like, sawed off, like, the base of it.
Yeah. And, like,
has a pistol.
Yeah, and those scenes are shown back to back. Like, Arnie is getting this entire, you know, ammo kit of stuff, of just, like, all types of different weapons, and Kyle only has, like, a sawn-on shotgun that probably doesn't have too much ammo, and a pistol, and, like, he has to live with that, and also he has to find Sarah Connor. They're both, like, chasing the right Sarah Connor, and, like, their approach, too, you know, like you said, they're merciless. We see Arnie killing those other Sarah Connors, and we see Kyle Reese going to find the right one. And he doesn't kill people in the process. He's, like, you know, using there's humanity in him in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, he'll beat people up, but he's not going to kill anyone. And I think that's also, like, so when we're going to the part in the club and all of that, and it's funny because, you know, so actually let's talk about Sarah a little bit.
Let's talk about Sarah.
So concerning Sarah Connor, it's a really interesting. I feel like she goes through a hero's journey in a lot of ways as well.
Absolutely does.
Is because she, you know, she's starting off, she's in LA, she's like every other, you know, girl in LA, waitress, she's trying to survive in a big bad city, and then all of a sudden she's pretty much brought the fate of the world in her hands, right? Like, literally, like, Terminators are trying to get her, and, you know, war veterans from the future are trying to save her. There's some very nice
foreshadowing for that, too. When, like, the waitress was like, hey, in 100 years, no one's gonna care.
In 100 years, no one's gonna care, or how, like, she says, oh, someone's trying to kill you. It's like, ooh. Yeah, some pretty good foreshadowing and all of that. And she's getting more freaked out and more freaked out. And then eventually what happens is that she kind of starts seeing Kyle following her, and she thinks it's Kyle that's the one that's actually trying to get her, so she ends up hiding in, like, this club, and then she, like, calls the police, and she's like, hey, man, someone's, like, following me, and they're like, all right, stay there. So she ends up getting a drink, she's trying to, like, watch Kyle and all that kind of stuff, and then, like, there was this really cool shot where, like, Arnold, who's, like, the real bad guy, is, like, coming through, she, like, drops something, and she ducks to get it, and then Arnold, like, looks her way but doesn't see her. But eventually Arnold does, in front of fucking everybody. He just goes up to her, pulls out his fucking gun, and aims for her head, and she's just looking. And then, like, what I really liked about this part, and it's so subtle in the way that they show Kyle being the good guy and all that, because it's like, yeah, obviously he's trying to save her, but we see Kyle, and he's brought with the fate, you know, he's basically, it's up to him to figure everything out. We'll talk about that later, but he basically has humanity's future in his hands. And, you know, he's like, there's a lot of people in front of him, and he's trying to get to the Terminator to shoot him. But instead of just taking out a shotgun and just shooting the Terminator and putting other people in harm's way, like he doesn't approach it in a very consequentialist sort of way, where it's like, okay, well, these people are gonna have to die for the greater of humanity. He's like actively getting people out of the way so he can get a clear shot. Like he's moving people out of the way. Even one person, even when he moves most of the people out and there's still one more person in front of him, he could get a shot in, but he doesn't want to risk harming that person. So he gets everyone out. He pushes everyone out to get a clear shot. And then, you know, he gets like fucking 10 shots in. The Terminator keeps coming and all that kind of stuff. And so it's just I never caught that when I was a kid. You know, I was like, wow, like he's a badass, you know, he is a badass, and it's a really cool thing, and we have to see Sarah step up and, you know, deal with this shit, being like this girl from LA that's probably like, I don't know, like barely as old as you and I, right? Like she's probably in her mid-20s or something.
They did
like that.
mention her exact age at some point, but I don't think we.
Yeah, I forget. But she's young. She's very young, right? Mm-hmm. And all of that, yeah. And we see her having to step up and you know, like take control of this situation in a lot of ways. Like towards the end, I know I'm kind of jumping ahead and all of that, but towards the end, she's like, you know, get up, Kyle. We have to keep moving and all that kind of stuff.
Get up,
Kyle's
soldier.
Injured.
Yeah.
Get up, soldier. That was badass, and all of that, and then like, you know, all of that. But let's talk about. I guess what we could talk about next is like the action itself and the violence.
Dude, I gotta say, like the editing was so like I guess the word I want to use is forgiving.
The editing fucking rules.
Yes. If we were to compare it with like the past and the present, by the standards, I like the bathroom scene because it cuts so beautifully. Like, you know, Arnie would be like turning his side and you see like the animatronic eyes on the other side of his head. Like clearly there's nothing there in a scene, but the way it's framed, it works. You know, they show
the way it's framed is great, but I mean like the animatronic itself.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I don't know. I was kind of with it too. There's only one shot where we see his eye like actively moving in the shot, and I was with it. I don't think it was really that bad.
I mean, I guess you could make an argument like, okay, when he shows more of his robotic self, he acts more robotic.
Yeah.
But when he's acting like a human, he just acts human. I mean, you can make that argument, but you could also just say like, yeah, the animatronic was just.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
wonky.
I never seen him quite act like a human, like other than, you know, trying to mimic other people's voices. But even then, you know, he was doing it for very inhumane reasoning.
Which goes to show like how well done, you know, his acting is, because you know, like, you know, Arnold, like, he's a bit of a meme in like the "I'll be back" or "Get to the chopper" and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But something like the Terminator, I think he acted so well. The acting, I feel like, was very underrated. And I know it's just like, well, he didn't say anything, so how could it be good acting? Dude, but no.
Fuck
like,
you,
more than likely, if you've never acted, you're probably gonna say some bullshit like that. Yeah. But coming as an actor, what he did is both physically imposing and just very. To convey that sense of dread and danger, and you barely say anything, is an acting feat within itself. It just is. And creating that danger and creating that tension and just that unstoppable force that he very much embodied that character to the fullest extent. And that is something that I think is really underrated in acting and that I don't feel like Hollywood appreciates enough. Is the physicality of an actor. And, you know, people cream themselves over, like, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio in, you know, what was it, in Django, which I think deserved an Oscar because he was incredible.
Dude, he was bleeding on set and kept going.
Yeah, that was incredible. And then, like, you know, all the other actors that have gotten Oscars, it's like, yeah, they did a great job. But people like Andy Serkis or Schwarzenegger that take these very physically demanding roles, I feel like they don't get enough love. Like, there's no reason why someone like Andy Serkis and what he's done with the Planet of the Apes, the new trilogy, and then, like, you know, Gollum in Lord of the Rings, like, that is Oscar-worthy shit, bro. Oh, yeah. It is.
I hope he gets, like, a recognition at some point. Kind of like, you know, Charlie Chaplin got an Oscar for like, a contribution.
Yeah, even Charlie Chaplin, like, that's very... it's a very hard thing to demand that much of a physical presence. It takes a lot of energy to do something like that, and I think that Schwarzenegger, it's a very commendable it's a very commendable thing that he did.
I mean,
with what he was given, you know.
he is known
Which wasn't a
because
lot.
of that role. You know, I mean, he was known.
Yeah,
before that.
exactly.
He was pretty famous by the time Terminator was being shot. But
Yeah, but it's not like the Terminator.
yeah.
Yeah, it's that's iconic. Yeah, and then what he did with the second one, but we'll talk about the second movie at someday.
Yeah, we gotta make a separate one for the second film. I keep coming back to the traditional storytelling because that was honestly the most fascinating thing for me. The basic things, that simple things that they just managed to make them work, and the release of information as well. So like you have this shot of I think it's definitely towards the beginning of the movie where before Kyle Reese even finds Sarah Connor, he like sleeps in the car and we see like the lights pointing at him from the crane, the thingy, and that gives him wartime flashbacks, and it's awesome. Well, not the wartime flashbacks, more like his entire life as a whole flashback, and
and
that
then like
kind of
his
shows in the
comrades
character.
getting exploded.
Yeah, like you know.
Yeah, he's very PTSD riddled. We see it because we see like how like he's in the police station and they he ends up getting arrested and all that after the Terminator chases him. He's brought in and Sarah's brought in, though she's fine. She's not like questioned or anything, but he's like screaming and he's like he'll rip her fucking heart out and he's like he's on edge and all that. And I actually think that Kyle Reese, that actor, is a very underrated actor in what he did, because he brought this whole depth to this character that you would think that flashback wise you'd get the most out of his character and who he was, but I actually think that like seeing him in the present and seeing how he's reacting to the normal world is like its story within itself, and it's something that's just he conveyed very, very well in my opinion.
And that
along with Sarah Connor, who had to really step up into figuring into her life and all that. It's a very I feel like Sarah's story is very coming of age in a lot of ways, and how she's young and she's a waitress and she's just kind of having fun of her life, and she's like kind of going out on dates, but people cancel on her, and she's oh whatever. But then how quickly she has to like grow up because her life is in complete danger and shit, and she really has to like she really has to become a new person and rely on herself and trust herself and other people and all of that in order to survive. And she becomes a very different person, especially in Terminator 2. She becomes a very different person, a badass person, but a very different person. And we see like this sweet LA girl in the beginning of the film, and then the last part of the film she's like, "You're terminated, fucker," and she like turns on the button. It's like, damn, this is a completely different person,
And this is why I think the debate between who the main character is, the Kyle Reese or Sarah Connor, it has to be her, because Kyle doesn't really go through a change. He's on a mission.
And
he's
he
still
dies.
a soldier. And, he dies, but, some would say that he, like, opens himself up to, like, loving someone. But he loved people before, like, that's...
Well, he loved her before. That's what he said.
He loved her
and I think...
the girl he was fighting with, right?
Yeah. No. He didn't love her. He said, I love you, Sarah. I always had. So, I guess this is kind of weird to say, but in like a lot of ways you could it's implied that John kind of groomed Kyle
to be his father.
To go back in time to be his father, yeah. To be his father. So like by talking about, so you hear he said a lot of things like, John didn't really talk. He's like, so Sarah in the beginning was like, "Well, do you have any idea who his father is?" And then Kyle's like, Kyle's like, "Well, he didn't really talk about his father much, but he talked about you a lot. He gave me the message to say thank you, Sarah, for your, bravery and blah 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 blah."
Yeah.
And then by giving Kyle the picture and all that kind of stuff, and grooming Kyle to like save Sarah and then end up being in love so he could exist. So it is implied that John did that.
Yeah, and with the change of Sarah Connor, like I think there's two times when her character goes through this major change. One of them is like kind of what the majority of the movie is, which is like purely traumatic, horrified, falling in love situation, until she kills the Terminator. And then
Yeah.
when we see her in that Jeep traveling down, it's kind of like another moment when she becomes more conscious of the future. And this is honestly, to me, this is kind of where the coming of age story really shines. The idea that at some point you start to become aware of the future and of where you're going and why you're doing it, and kind of like the greater purpose that you have in life, and the idea of trying to, not like pursuing a goal necessarily. Like you can't really compare it to like a choosing a career path of sorts. It's just the idea of being more aware of things and not stepping into them just like, trying to, carry it on. And I
Yeah.
think that type of consciousness that she obtains is kind of like the main aspect of Terminator being a coming of age story. Becoming more
Yeah.
aware of like the dangers of the world and the things you have to do in a long term to save not just yourself but like other people, and people
Yeah.
that will eventually you will give birth to in Sarah Connor's case. And
Yeah.
I think it's also really cool that like the whole recorded tapes are introduced in the very end, and it kind of makes the story come full circle. And what I really loved about this type of narrative is, like yes, the Terminator is an extremely like traditional, played by the book type of story with villains and power dynamic being introduced in a very very generic basic way. But I think what stands out a lot is the concept art and kind of the storytelling with the time travel and the way the time travel is handled in the first movie is
Yeah.
like we don't know about those tapes, and we only find out that John Connor knew that that Kyle Reese was going to be his father at the very end, when we find out that Sarah Connor leaves the tapes to her son. And it kind of makes everything come full circle, but it also makes you question everything the whole movie, and the movie knows that. So I think, and that was to me the most charming thing about this film. And like, yes, it's the 80s. It looks a very specific way. Some special effects don't necessarily pull off. There are elements to it that don't necessarily, in a 2020, just kind of hard to see. But the things that make this film truly shine are these tiny details that, just the storyteller is aware of what the question the viewer is going to be asking next, which is why like we kind of get that from the conversation with the therapist, the criminal psychiatrist or criminal psychologist. I don't know what he introduced himself as.
Yeah.
Like, he
I
was
think
asking,
that's
why
what it
didn't you bring
is.
the weapons? It's like, because of this and that. And John Connor goes like, I didn't create the damn thing. And I'm like, okay, I'm with it. Like,
Yeah, because I think they said something about like human tissue.
Yeah,
tissue
he
or
was
whatever
saying
is
that.
the only thing that's able to go through the time machine. Hence why the Terminators.
Yeah,
got
because
that,
he's
so that
he's
they could
covered in
time
human
travel.
flesh, which
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense. And what I do think was great is just like it answers these questions when we have them, and the film is kind of making us fully aware that we know the questions you're asking, and it's just so hard to get someone on board with something as hard as time traveling in the first place. But this movie does it really well, and it does it by withholding information, and at the point where it kind of is tired of explaining it, it reminds us that Kyle Reese doesn't know everything. He's just a soldier following orders.
He is just a soldier.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
he did not
yeah,
create
yeah.
the time
It's like he's
machine.
not even like that. It's not even like he's the guy that's like, well, I know this because of the flux capacitor and blah. No,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
like he's a soldier and he's just doing his mission.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
the film
yeah.
kind of does really find a perfect balance between world building, storytelling, exposition, and just straight up action, and it just keeps you in. And it even
So let's
has
go to the
titties.
action part. Yeah, titties, exactly.
Yeah, the action part.
That's the best part. That's the real action.
That's the real action part.
Exactly. But let's
I mean,
get to the actual.
what do you have to say about the action part that stood out so much? Because honestly, to me, like, I love the action, and I think it's in many ways established what the action is on a playbook and whatnot. But to me, like, nothing
Yeah.
really stood out too much. Like, yeah, trucks exploding, things shooting. Like, what is your take on the action?
Well, for me, I think the action. I think the action within itself tells that story between man versus machine, which I was talking about earlier, and how whenever Kyle is going up against the Terminator and how he's protecting people and he's trying to get people out of the way, and then he ends up shooting the Terminator, right? And I think that within itself, what I was saying earlier, tells its own story. I mean, obviously, it's just a dumb, not dumb, but it's like it's just action and it's fun. But I think there's a little bit of a deeper meaning when it comes to that. But then also, it's just awesome parts of it too, like, you know, uh, well, actually, just like, actually, okay, so I kind of have been meaning to save this a little bit like later, but I'll just kind of say it now. So,
Yeah.
and just watching, I watched this YouTube video, and there's just other research I was doing, like Reddit talks about the Terminator and just like the deeper meaning of it. And I guess for me, I actually think the Terminator is a lot deeper than people give credit for. I guess like before I talk about that, I know you said that you had some problems with the movie. Actually, if you want to go ahead and talk about that, because I could offer some counterpoints as well.
Yeah, just like I guess the one major issue I had in the end of the movie, Sarah Connor leaves a message, and she says that they knew each other for, I think she said 20 hours or something along those lines, or like whatever time, the little time they had together.
But we loved a lifetime.
They loved a lifetime, and I'm just like, that's the part I did not see. I saw everything else she says, the significance of it, the character change, the threat, all the thresholds they passed together, the battles they fought, but I didn't really get the love between them. I saw the attraction and attachment that actually was cultivated quite naturally. You kind of get why Kyle loves her, because he had that picture, you know, he had that whole thing going on for him. The emotional aspect was introduced so much, mainly because we were so focused on his trauma and kind of, you know, the lights flashing in his face, like, and things of that nature. But, like, you know, it didn't quite harm the character. Like, I was on board with, you know, him loving her. But, like, again, he only says it once, and he kind of spills the beans, and it's a little awkward. And he's like, I shouldn't have said that. And when he says that, like, you know, in that whole scene when they're in a motel, and he's like, I shouldn't have said that. And I'm like, yeah, right. Like, he shouldn't have. This is not the time. They're fighting for their lives. You know, he's trying to save her. He's on a mission. It's not really about that right now.
But he loves her, Igor. It's never the right time to say
okay,
I love
fair,
you.
fair.
But
But
you just say it.
But you see, the only type of like attraction that she has towards him is like he's just kind of being in power. We didn't quite get,
or like a savior complex kind of thing.
Of some sort. Yeah, I would actually. Yeah, to some extent. It's just like there was no kind of characteristic to Kyle Reese from Sarah's perspective, other than the idea that, yeah, this is like this soldier who lived a lifetime of suffering, who had a picture of her, and like he loves her, but he came from another world, and she just got over to, like, you know, this idea that there is the future and time traveling is possible. By the way, you're about to be killed, you know, like that whole thing. I don't think there is time to cultivate this type of attraction that she like that she would call love. If anything, like if you were to transcribe, I guess, their relationship into, you know, the real world, I would talk about it as if there's this girl who finds this kind of damaged guy who claimed that he can save her, but, like, you know, in the real world, it's Terminator's not trying to kill you, and in the real world, no, like, person with PTSD is going to have information for you that's gonna save your life. At least I can't think of a situation like that, you know. And to some extent, it kind of romanticizes this type of relationship. And while in the movie it kind of works because he's saving her life literally, in real world it kind of promotes this type of attraction that is just based on this person saving her and, like, claiming to be this person who loves her. And it's kind of, is that all she needs to love him? And this is why I feel like, you know, the whole thing of like a lifetime of loving doesn't quite earn itself in the movie. All the other aspects absolutely do, but that just doesn't quite get to me, just because. And I think the main reason why is because with all the good, you know, checks and balances that the movie does really great with the world building and all those other things, and the sci-fi and the basic storytelling and the balancing of the villain and good versus evil, it kind of fails to deliver Sarah Connor's arc and kind of like her personality, and that's kind of like they don't really treat their female characters as well as the male counterparts. Like, you know, the even the Sarah Connor's best friend, the one who just listens to music all the time, that's kind of all she does. There's no other aspect to her other than listening to music and then being terrified when her boyfriend is getting killed, you know, and not responding to the message. And yeah, like, I feel like Sarah Connor is kind of in a similar place. Like, by the end of the movie she's not, but I feel like she was lacking this little bit of character trait that would help us indicate that she is in fact in love with that man, you know. And there could be thousands of places where they could do it, but they just kind of didn't. And I feel like that is kind of a, you know, an unfortunate kind of writing. What's the word I'm looking for? Like, it's not an error.
Hiccup.
Not a hiccup, not an error. It's like a missed opportunity. There you go. To like just develop her character a little more, so that we understand why Kyle Reese loves her, but we don't quite get why she loves him. Because saving your life is one thing, loving someone and having a baby with that person is the other. So yeah.
I hear what you're saying. On a surface level, I could even understand it, but I disagree.
Tell me more.
When I talk about how underrated Terminator is in the story of it itself, and why I feel like it separates itself from a lot of other action sci-fi movies, is this story and how it's so subtle that you don't even know. Like, Arnold himself read the script and he's like, and I just wanted to do this because there's just something different about this film, and I could sense it and I could feel it. And I think not a lot of people have been able to put this in words. A few have, but I'll put this in words for you. So, as I was saying earlier, Terminator is a film of both man versus machine, but also I think another story that it tells that people don't really look at is man versus man. So, with a lot of the character stuff you were talking about, we look at 1984 and we see how gritty it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's something else that we don't really see. We do see, but people don't really talk about. Technology and technology reliance.
Mm-hmm.
So, the first thing that we see, you know, like, one of the first things we see is like, okay, remember that part, you know, Sarah's roommate is listening to her music, right? And she's just getting ready and she has her earbuds on, right? She's just listening to her music. And then Sarah goes to pick up the phone. It picks it up and it's her boyfriend, right? I forget her name, but the girl who's listening to music, that's her boyfriend. Yeah. And he's saying all these like sexual things and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, what he's gonna do
over the phone, right? Like
mm-hmm.
over the phone. And then the next shot we see them in bed and they're having sex, right? And she's still listening to her music. Even afterwards, when she goes to get herself a post-coitus snack, she's still listening to her music.
Yeah.
So that right there is going to show you that we're living in a world where people are already so robotic, which is the reason why it's so hard to tell the difference between a Terminator who has flesh and just a human, is because people are already acting like robots. You know? And she's like, who listens to music while having sex with earphones on, bro? I could understand maybe like, oh, we just have it in the background. But listening to it with earbuds, sex is a very intimate thing. You know, it's one of the most human things that you can do. Eating, drinking water, and fucking. And sleeping are like the most human things that you could do.
I cannot disagree with that.
And she's doing it in the most robotic way, listening to earphones. And then, right? And we already see the lack of humanity that humans are already kind of have, even in the 80s. Or how in the club they're all listening to techno music and they're all dancing to it, and they're not even realizing the danger of the Terminator itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we look at the cops and we look at all the other people and they're like, this thing with a time-traveling robots, that's not real. This isn't real. That's not going to happen. It's how we're acting with technology right now in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And the way that we're looking at it is like, well, we have control over our technology. We could do whatever we want with it because it's the human arrogance that we have that ultimately leads to our downfall. It leads to our downfall in the future with Skynet in this film universe, and it leads to the downfall of why so many people end up dying is because they're not taking the threat of technology seriously because we're so reliant on it, but we also feel like we could just do anything. You know, we can, listen to music while having sex because who cares? We can jerry rig cars or do whatever. It's not a big deal to us, but it is a big deal. And this is the reason why I believe Sarah and Kyle can fall in love, because in a robotic world where everyone's completely plugged in, they're listening to their techno music, they're glued to their screens and all of that, they are the most human of the entire film. we have Kyle who's risking his life to save this woman he kind of barely even knows, though he just knows that, like, okay, I really like John Connor a lot, you know, he's the savior and all that, but he barely knows this woman, yet he's risking everything to save her. And then Sarah, who, and I say that she's kind of like every other girl, she is, but she's also very different in a lot of ways, because you could tell that she feels a little bit out of place with some stuff, you know, like with people, like when when her roommate's doing her hair and listening to her music, she's just doing her hair regularly and trying to start a conversation, you know. And she's like, oh, I'm so sorry, and you know, she fucks up the orders and all that kind of stuff. There's something very human about her, right? And there's something very human about Kyle, which is why I can believe in the romance, because when you have two people who are acting the most human and actual robots and people who are acting like robots, of course they're gonna fall in love with each other, right?
That is, you know, now that I think about it, the interactions that they did have together, right? She would like
are very human, because like they're biting each other, they're yelling at each other, they're being intimate with each other. That's as human as two characters have gotten in this entire film, Terminator included, but just with regular people. When other people have regular conversations, they almost kind of talk like Arnold in a lot of ways, right? Or the people in the police station, they're like, oh yeah, the guy's a loon. Or the, you know, the black dude, he's like, the commissioner or whatever, he's all like, this is body armor. See, there's no way that, you know, that guy's a robot or anything like that. He's probably on PCP. And they're just all like, kind of, a device, exactly. They're all acting like tools, right? But when we see the interactions between Kyle and Sarah, it's the most heightened human. It's the most human because it's so heightened and the tension's so high between them. You know? Whether he's screaming and all that kind of stuff, right? Which is why I can believe their romance.
You know, that is very true. And, you know, I guess like with the final point that I just thought of, when you said that they're doing all of these human things, one of the things that stood out to me while I was watching it, I like even pinpointed it, I think one of the most intimate things that happened was a piece of exposition tied into their relationship when she bandages him up and he is, you know, noticing it, and then she's asking him to just speak. And he tells her about his past. And while that happens, she's falling asleep, just like on his lap. And that's another primal thing that humans do, other than, you know, biting, screaming at each other, arguing. It's storytelling.
Yeah, and not only that too, but Kyle's story within itself, in my opinion, is a man who is becoming more human in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because as we look through his arc throughout the film, he's very Terminator-like in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously he's still human, because I say like he's the most human and all that, but the way that they're acting in that war is very robotic. It's like, no, I can't be that connected with people because the enemy can use that against you. He gets shot and he doesn't talk about it, acting like Arnold when he gets shot. You know, the actual Terminator, when the Terminator gets shot, he doesn't react to it at all. But Kyle doesn't react to it as well. But then Sarah's like, well, no, you know, you're shot. Let me take care of that. So the more human Kyle is becoming, the more vulnerable he gets, which ultimately leads into his death.
But
because that's him at his most. That's him at his most human. You know, when he had sex with Sarah and all of that. That's him at his most human. He loves her. They fully admitted it to each other, and he feels himself around her. That's when he dies, because that's when he's at his most vulnerable, because that's also where he's at his most vulnerable emotionally as well.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, just the idea of sacrificing himself for her, you know, it's also the most.
That's as human as it gets.
It's the devotion.
Exactly.
And, you know, the other way of looking at it is, what is more human than sex? Death.
Yeah. Death. Well, yeah, exactly.
And that's our show.
And that's it.
Thank you for listening, everybody. This was Last Minute Movies. And
like, subscribe, check out the social medias.
Do
all peace out, everybody.
All the bullshit. Much love and have a good night.